Hello listeners, you're listening to Lore Talk, part of the Lore and Legend Storytelling podcast series. Welcome to our second Lore Talk episode. In these episodes, we're discussing the lore behind our tales and the creative decisions that we made when telling them. It's been a while since our last episode of Lore Talk, so when we met we had a lot to cover. For that reason, we've decided to split this edition of Lore Talk into 3 parts. In part 1, of Warlocks and Will-O-Wisps, we'll be discussing our 4 Halloween episodes: Byard's Leap, The Wife of Ushers' Well, Jack of the Lantern and The Warlock. We've heard from some of you that the Halloween episodes are now some of your favourites, so we hope you enjoy hearing us discuss some of the lore behind these tales. In part 2, of Parrots and Porridge Wands, we tackle some of the lingering questions we had about some of the stories in Series 1, particularly the later episodes. We revisit the Buried Moon to talk about issues in classism and attribution in folklore studies. Seb and I puzzle over the existence of porridge wands, only to discover that we both have one in our kitchen drawers. And we consider the unusual role of the parrot in Lady Isabel, leading us to delve into a rich history of folklore and folk stories about parrots. In part 3 of Lisa and Lady Isabel, I sit down with a friend and follower of the podcast, Lisa Belila. Lisa has been a supporter of the podcast right from the beginning, and giving us early feedback on episodes, but is new to the world of folklore and storytelling. In this part of Lore Talk, Lisa tells us what it's like to listen to stories on the podcast versus live storytelling, and gives us her thoughts on the female characters in our episodes and how they are represented in traditional folklore narratives. All of that coming up, but first, welcome to part 1 of Warlocks and Will-O-Wisps.
Hello.
Hello and welcome to the second Lore Talk episode of the podcast.
Of Lore and Legends podcast, yeah.
Tonight in Sheffield it is raining so much that Seb turned up drenched to the skin.
Yeah, and I'm slightly apprehensive about the possibility of whether or not I'm going to be able to get home. So that's how wet it is here. I feel like I could be more poetic about that. The rain pours off every surface and joins the oncoming river as we're... And you get the idea. You've seen rain before.
Well, somebody posted one of the Sheffield for sale boards, 1 arc, £1,000. So that's how epic it is. £1,000 for an arc though, that's pretty good value.
yeah, definitely.
To carry 2 of every animal.
I mean, it's got to be pretty big.
So yes, tonight's episode is tentatively titled Of Parrots and Porridge Wands. Should we start with the Halloween episodes?
Let's do it. They're fresh in our minds.
It's been a while since you last heard from us in this capacity anyway. We've released quite a few story episodes, but not any discussions.
Yeah, I'm sorry you've all missed the melodious sound of our discussing voices.
So, do you want to start? You did the Warlock.
I did. Well, it's the listener comment. Yeah, a friend of mine was telling me that he really liked the episodes, particularly Byard's Leap and The Wife of Ushers' Well, are short and quite punchy. Like they accomplish what they set out to do very quickly and neatly, which is good. He was also saying that there's a good sort of theme of arrogance and hubris being the downfall of the characters. So in Jack of the Lantern, you're sort of rooting for Jack in a kind of odd way because he's beating the devil at his own game. He's being more of an asshole than the devil is. And yet, ultimately, his successes are his own downfall because that is why he has to wander the world forever, because he's locked himself out of heaven and hell.
Yeah, I think you do have to, because there are several different versions of the tale, and you do have to kind of double down on the wicked aspects of his character, otherwise you do end up rooting for Jack, I feel. Especially some of the American versions of the tale they several of them don't include the three wishes, and are just about Jack tricking the devil with a drinking game, or sometimes he meets the devil in the road, and you're told that Jack is an evil man or whatever, but he appears more like a bit of a scoundrel, and you're kind of rooting for him. That's why I added in the stuff about the shipwrecking, which isn't a part of the original sources.
Okay.
But sometimes jack-o'-lanterns are called hobbity lanterns, and there is a folkloric practice of hobbity being used to shipwreck people by hanging the lamp on a donkey, a lame donkey, so that it kind of like is going up and down as it walks, and creating this bobbing motion. I think the thing that I was reading said this probably isn't true, basically because sailors aren't that stupid. But there is one other thing that I didn't include in the tale because it is very, very dark, but it was almost too dark for me, and that's the fact that sometimes Jack has a wife in these tales.
I feel like this isn't going to go well.
Well, he beats her, you see.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the same source did say that she beat him all the time as well, and that they're actually equals in their perfidity. so it seems they beat each other black and blue, and later on she helps him to torture the devil. But it's still I just excise that.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain topics that require a large amount of sensitivity, and if you're sufficiently committed to the tale that you want to tell it in its entirety, then it's worth it. But sometimes it is worth just sort of gracefully bowing out and drawing a line somewhere.
Yeah, and sometimes details make a story more complex needlessly as well, because you have to spend more time explaining, oh well, this was Jack's wife and this and all that kind of thing. So
yeah, particularly as Jack and his wife beat each other and then they torture the devil, it comes across quite glib if you don't sort of go into it quite a bit, and then at that point, yeah, you're quite right. It would end up quite a bit longer. He was also talking about the what's it called, the Warlock. Right. He was saying that there's a particularly British appeal to the kind of villainy that Lord Sulis displays, because there's all that veneer of politeness. Of, oh no, don't worry, it's absolutely fine. Of course I wouldn't be angry with you, whilst all parties to the conversation know that things are not as they're being portrayed to be, and this person is manipulating and scheming, and it's that instinctive desire to not break the politeness of the situation. There's the stereotypical thing of not wanting to say, hey, fuck off, you jackass. Well, but of course, in the actual story there are more concrete reasons why the protagonist can't do something like that, but nonetheless there is a sort of more appeal to the sensibilities in that way.
No, I enjoyed the Warlock. Do you want to talk a bit about the ending? Because
yes,
you changed that a bit, didn't you?
I did, and so a thing that I have had comment about is that people really like the Macbeth sort of echoes, and as far as I can see, because the tale of Lord Sulis predates Macbeth, it may well be something that helped to influence Macbeth in some way. But Macbeth is done in a more sort of... you get these prophecies. Nothing can harm you until all of Birnam Wood marches on Dunsinane. No man of woman born may kill you. And these things turn out to be true in ways that you wouldn't really expect them to be true. And so the false sense of security that Macbeth is lulled into is his undoing. But in the source material that I saw for Lord Sulis, for the Warlock, he's told these same things. Beware an oncoming tree, until threefold rope of sifted sand around your body twine. But although there is an oncoming tree in the marching trees, the sifted sand doesn't play out in a satisfying way, because they try to bind him with ropes of sifted sand.
Because at that stage he's using a magic book, isn't he?
Yes.
Which he brought back with him from Fairyland, apparently.
Yeah.
That was supposed to have been written by the Scots sorcerer Michael Scott, who was a real person but was only rumoured to be a sorcerer. And he's actually supposed to have taught Lord Sulis himself. So by a somewhat circuitous route, Michael Scott seems to have trained Lord Sulis, written a magic book. The magic book's ended up in Fairyland after he's died. Thomas the Rhyme has picked up the book and brought it back with him. And then he tries to use the magic book to bind Lord Sulis on the beach.
Yes, but it doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
And so in the end, there's a lot of, sort of fancy footwork of trying to make it work. And then they go, oh, what the hell, we'll just boil him in lead. And admittedly, they boil him at a stone circle, so it's got a certain amount of poetic connection there. But it has nothing to do with sifted sand. And so I wanted to find a way where the things that are said are actually true, just like in Macbeth, in ways you wouldn't expect them to come true. And so having him boiled alive in molten glass had the advantage that is a product of sand. I didn't go into it. I thought it was sort of the idea of, telling everybody that they poured a cauldron of molten glass all around his body so that the ropes wrapped around him was possibly a little bit too graphic.
Or maybe they were poles they use for glass blowing,
Yeah, smearing them around him. And I thought, really, that doesn't sound like what they'd do. They probably would just throw him in the molten glass.
Yeah.
But if they then took him out, then the glass solidifies and wraps around him. So
it's like a glass coffin.
Yeah, exactly. In a terrifying sort of way.
I love the idea. I suppose I do think it takes a little bit away from the legend. Burning him at the local stone circle seems to have been a pretty big and important part of it. So I don't know if maybe I would have said they brought the glassmaker from his workshop or something.
I thought about that, but then I was like, what a faff. Can you imagine trying to explain to the listener why it was they had to take the glassblower's workshop en masse and transport it to a stone circle just in order to kill this guy?
You could also argue that the sand ropes don't bind him, but maybe they do twine around him. So, he conjures the ropes and they do wrap around him and he breaks out of them. So in some ways the prophecy is still intact. One of the folklorists who found the tale said that part of the legend is supposed to explain... you get worm-like tracks in the sand. It kind of settles and all of these strange things. Presumably in the locality where the legend's based. I don't know enough about beaches to know how common it is. Probably fairly. So people are like, oh, those are the ropes of sand that they tried to use to bind Lord Sulis.
Okay. What I find bizarre about that is that there aren't really beaches nearby. They would have had to transport him quite a way, because Hermitage Castle is just outside Kiel the Forest. It's a reasonable distance to the sea. They'd be riding for a few hours.
Are there any lakes or anything around there?
Yeah, I mean, Kiel the Water isn't that far away. Maybe the beach is at Kiel the Water. But the other thing that I did with that story was to a reversal in the character that's focused on, because it's Sulis that receives the most attention in certainly the Walter Scott version that I was working off. And I thought that actually, if we were having a Halloween story, we want some peril, we want some danger. And at that point, his victim seemed like the obvious choice. And so there was, in that version, Branxholme's brother is the one who sounds the alarm and brings the king's men to him. But I thought that was an unnecessary character, and that's why I chose May as the one around whom the action would be focused, which I think did pay off, because she plays a very bit part in the original version.
Ballads. Yeah. I thought that part of the tale worked really well. We did have some comments that the voice work that you've done on the Redcap, I can't hear what he's saying, so I said, all right, I'll fix that. I re-recorded the voice. If you haven't re-listened to the tale since I uploaded that, then we'll play the new voice now, and you can tell me if that sounds any better.
But you bear charm life while you hold the life of me. Gates, lance and arrow, sword and knife, I shall your warrant be. No forged steel, nor hempen band shall ever your limbs confine, till threefold ropes of sifted sand around your body twine. If danger do press, knock thrice on the chest, with rusty padlocks bound. Turn away your eyes when the lid shall rise, and listen to the sound.
Yeah, did you read much about Redcaps?
I read a certain amount. The one of the things that I felt about the Redcap in that story was that it was disappointing that you didn't get as much exposure to the creature as you might have, because the Redcap gets its name because it dips its hat into the blood of its fallen enemies. That's something that never really comes up in the story. The Redcap advises Sulis, but never comes out, and the only other involvement it has is to, break the charm when Sulis tries to look at it. I wanted some sense that this was a ferocious creature that would tear your heart out and eat it. They're said to haunt abandoned castles in Scotland. So to warn you against, deciding to go and have a play around in an old castle at 1 o'clock in the morning, don't go there because the Redcap will eat you.
Well, that's one of the ways that these tales are thought to work, actually, isn't it? Like a lot of the legends about water demons, like Jenny Greenteeth and things, most people say they were tales told to kids to keep them from playing near water.
Yeah.
So maybe the Redcap's the same for, don't go climbing up the tower face, because you might meet a Redcap or catch the Lannisters unawares.
Yeah. The thing about not playing near water, I can't remember. Have I mentioned the fact that in like past ages, lots and lots of people couldn't swim, and so water was just a terrifying element that you didn't want to be going anywhere near. It's one of the reasons why there are so many water beasts that you don't fuck around with.
I like the idea of the Redcaps being fort sprites. One guy, William Henderson, writes that the Redcaps resembled a short, thick-set old man with long, prominent teeth, skinny fingers armed with talons like eagles, large eyes of a fiery red colour, gristly hair streaming down his shoulders, iron boots, a pike staff in his left hand, and of course a red cap on his head.
They were rumoured to be similar in appearance to the Dunter, but the Dunter apparently largely just makes unpleasant sounds and is quite grouchy. Whereas the
castle poltergeist.
Yeah, exactly. It must have been unpleasant if you didn't know whether what you were facing was a Redcap or a Dunter. And then it turned out for the worse.
There's a theory that Redcaps, along with those other ones that you mentioned, the Dunter, or there's another one called the Powery, there's a theory that they were the spirits of victims sacrificed on the foundation stones of the castles by the Picts, who built the first castles in those sites. So that's it's quite a cool idea of why is they're hiding in these castles which humans have built.
Yeah. It gives them such a strong tie to it.
And there's another case sort of fairies or fae also being another manifestation of the dead, which has come up a few times.
One of the things I did try and build into that story was a sense that whilst the Redcap was sort of doing Solus's bidding, it sort of viewed itself as the true lord of the castle. That it really, you know, only sort of tolerated Solus for as long as he was useful to it.
But Leyden and Scott mention actually that. So you're saying that there isn't much sign of the rapacity of the Redcap in the tale, but they do have this little bit where they say that, the chamber that Sulis locked him in before he departed the castle and sort of left him there. And apparently the chamber itself is supposed to have sort of sunk down into the earth, so that it's still there in the ruins, but nobody knows where it is. But they said that if you're to insert a branch into the crack at the door and pull it out, then you find it stripped of its bark.
Oh,
so those rapacious talons are in there somewhere.
The only other thing I wanted to say was that the legend of Solus as this sorcerer, there's an element to which, so a lot of it is impossible because Solus wasn't living in Hermitage Castle in the point at which the tale happens. He's imprisoned in Dumbarton Castle at the request of Robert the Bruce. I wonder whether the story actually is a form of propaganda.
Right.
In order to discredit this man who's plotted against the king, say he's a dark and evil sorcerer who consorts with vile demons. Instead, he's probably just a reasonably ordinary, nasty man who wants power for himself. I had options as to how to pronounce his name because I could have gone with Sulis. Contacted a Scottish friend of mine for the closest I could get to old Scottish pronunciation, and she didn't know, so I felt like that gave me carte blanche to use largely whatever. And I also found recordings on the internet where people said it, and I found both Sulis and Solus, and I thought Solus has a more sort of poetic edge here. There's a sort of foreboding to his name. So. Yeah.
Well, the history of Hermitage Castle is quite long and bloody in itself.
Yeah.
Some of the highlights, there was, I think one of the next owners, Sir William Douglas, apparently imprisoned. It says a comrade. He imprisoned a comrade there and starved him to death. As you do to your comrades.
As you do to your comrades. That's how I treat my comrades.
Mary, Queen of Scots, married the Earl of Bothwell, even though he was probably involved in murdering one of her previous husbands. And the Earl of Bothwell was the Lord of Hermitage Castle. He ended his days apparently going insane in prison at another castle, Dragsholm. His nephew Francis Stewart was then arrested during King James's witch hunts.
But you know what all this means, don't you?
What's that?
Well, that the Redcap did remain within Hermitage Castle and did keep advising all of its next rulers, sowing the seeds of evil.
The sound design for Byard's Leap was a lot of fun. The kind of crazy thing with these shows, you find yourself looking around for noise of a dying horse on sites and coming up with nothing. You then have to come up with something yourself. So our dying horse sounds were groaning camels, mixed with kind of like slow down effects, so that it kind of like became a rattle. But yes,
I find it. I mean, I suppose dying horse is a bit of a unique sound. You only get it once with a horse, but I do find it interesting that groaning camel is a thing that you can find more straightforwardly online.
It was basically just a recording of camels and the noises that they make, which are quite groaning anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and yeah, Byard Sleep was a good one. I can't remember how I first came across it, but I found it on this website called Mysterious England and Ireland, and there were quite a lot. Well, what's interesting is there's quite a lot of pubs called Byard Sleep. There was one here in Sheffield as well. It closed down, unfortunately, as so many pubs are these days. But it just kind of showed that at one stage, the legend must have been fairly well known. Out and about for pubs to have named themselves after it.
Yeah, I do wonder sometimes whether the pubs are going to be named after things that are resonant in the public's imagination, or whether it's just you've got a niche interest publican who I'm just going to call it this.
Yeah, well, we're quite far away from North Keviston, Lincolnshire, here in Sheffield.
That's true.
But we did get a Byard Sleep. And I suppose the Jack of the Lantern, I was quite interested. I was quite... I spent a lot of time trying to track down the original sources for the Jack-Lantern myth. Because there wasn't much about it apart on Wikipedia, apart from the more recent, it seemed more Americanized versions of the tale called, which tend to be called Stingy Jack. But after eventually chasing down the sources in lots of different books that are online, just to be clear, I wasn't trapped in the library, but. I actually found I'd just been looking in the wrong place. Those original tales were all in the entry for Will-O-Wisps. Originally a Jack of the Lantern and a Will-O-Wisp were essentially the same things.
And this was the first time I learned that.
Yeah. I didn't realise that, and that's interesting. And the fact that some people, rather than Will-O-Wisps as a class of spirits, that there was actually sometimes a tale of Will of the Wisp. You learn so much looking at these things.
Absolutely.
Did you make any jack-o'-lanterns this Halloween?
I really wanted to, but a combination of things and largely disorganisation meant I couldn't. But what did happen was that the neighbours had made many, and in order that we might be able to, trying to think of a word, advertise the fact that we had sweets to neighbourhood children. All of the words that I was coming up with were lure and entice, and I thought I can't really say that. So that was very nice. We usually do carve pumpkins, but not this time. I did wonder about carving a turnip, but it did strike me that turnips are much harder than pumpkins. And actually, the Irish, when they arrived in America, must have they struck gold with that one. They can ditch the old turnips and start carving these things.
Yeah, in our tale, the devil rather swiftly hollows out a turnip, and that must be a special devil power, because I think when you look at the photos online of turnip jack-o'-lanterns, they look much more sinister, but that's basically because people had to sort of slash the eyes into these turnips, so they look much more horrific. But yeah, a good tale, and again, before I started looking into it, I never realised that there was a tale of Jack of the Lantern. So
there was a
great
pub
story
in Loughborough called Jack-o'-Lantern. So Loughborough was where I went to school, and it had a much more brief version of that tale that you could read on the outdoor wall of the pub, which is quite nice, really. I don't think I ever went in that pub. It's a shame. I did go in the Hobgoblin pub round the corner though. So.
You might have met the devil at the end of the bar.
That's quite possible. I thought we might talk a little bit about the Wife of Ushers as well. Something my friend mentioned. My friend's name is Pierre, by the way. I'll credit him with the comments that he's made. But it's quite sort of bleak and nihilistic. Not entirely, because obviously you're looking in a sort of very humane way at the grief of the mother, but it's kind of unrelenting. There is no solace for the grieving mother. It has an echo of the story in Harry Potter, and the Tales of Beedle the Bard, the Deathly Hallows, the stone that is used to summon back the dead, and the dead that come back are always sort of detached and removed, and you can't ever really properly see them or touch them, and you sort of spend all your life's energies trying your best to connect with them, and you gradually wither away and die yourself. And it's a similar thing with the widow, where she wishes so much for her sons to come back that they do, but nothing that she can do regarding her dead sons can ever make them as alive as her real living daughter.
Who she's sadly neglecting.
Yes.
Which is a sad comment on a true fact, because in many cultures where, like sons are more sought after and loved than daughters and that kind of thing, you do actually find that mothers will love their sons more than their daughters.
Definitely.
One of the things that I find about this tale is that I like I say, the dead come back, but they don't come back as zombies that try to kill you.
Yeah.
The demands that they make on the living are, just common everyday things, feed me, give me something to drink, go to bed, and it's the impossibility of that and the kind of the unnaturalness of it that sort of forms the core of the tale. I think that, as said, this idea that it's nihilistic, we have a particular reaction to it as a modern audience. One of the elements of the original tale, it goes out of its way to tell you that she's a wealthy woman. And so when she utters this curse, saying essentially that she won't believe in God or the Holy Ghost or any of these things, almost professing a kind of atheism, there is that idea of hubris. She's used to having everything her own way.
Yeah.
And that's why she can't abide by the loss of her sons.
Yeah.
But of course, the original tale is told in the context of there being a heaven that they go to, and so the unnaturalness of grief, that the grief is kind of inappropriate in one sense because they are living on in heaven, and you do have to release them. Yeah. Whereas we have I think a much more sympathetic view of the woman and her grief.
Yeah, because that is one of the things that comes up, and it is a motif that you see in folk traditions in Britain. The unquiet grave, the dead that cannot rest because the living won't leave them alone. But the thing I like most about the tale is quite how sort of chilling it is to have, she wishes for this thing to happen, and gradually up the hill walk 3 dead men. And it reminded me a little bit of there's a story of the Monkeys Paw, where a husband and wife wish for enough money just to pay off their mortgage, I think it is. It's quite a modern retelling of that sort of thing. And then they get a phone call saying that their son has been killed, but the life insurance policy is just enough to cover their mortgage. And then
that's dark.
Yes. And then the wife wishes for the son to return, and you don't get any real other explanation than a figure then comes walking towards their house, and he's just outside the door when I think the husband then wishes it all away. I can't remember exactly, but essentially wishes that this would stop, And you do get this sense that whatever form the sun is coming back in, it's not going to be nice for the people who are there for it. And it does have that classic, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, the original tale, the wife loses her sons to plague, but I chose to set it in the context of the First World War, mainly because I think it was the centenary when I first came across this tale and when I first told it in a particular setting. You know, in sort of contemporary memory, that is one of the sort of the most powerful and kind of resonant contexts for mothers and children and death and its kind of, you know, sort of implacable nature.
Yeah.
And there are two different versions. There are several different versions of the tale. They're folk songs, in fact, originally. And if you haven't already, you should definitely check out the Lore and Legend playlist for the Halloween episode. Versions of the Wife of Ushers are great to listen to. The version that I used for the episode, I say that they return near Christmas. But in several of them, in fact, they return on Martinmas, which I wish that I'd recorded in the original now, because not only is Martinmas apparently Old Hallowmas or the Old Halloween, but Martinmas, the Feast of Saint Martin, takes place on the 11th of November, which is Armistice Day. So
then has a
it's a poignant echo of that. So
the thing I was going to say about the First World War is that there is a sense because the First World War was the first time for a long time that so many people had died in a war that Britain was involved in, that we'd been involved in conflicts over the last 100 years, and of course some people died, but it was seen as a chance for glory, and so a lot of people tried very hard to get their children into the army, who wanted their children to have status and opportunities. And there is a sense in which the First World War represents in British cultural history a moment of realization of really what war is about and the real human cost, and that there was, when you went round villages in England at that kind of time, you suddenly started seeing things going up in people's windows telling you how many of their sons had died, because there was a cross that said the Psalm, and then there was a cross that said Passchendaele, and it became, because of how many people from everywhere had lost relatives, it became unavoidable. Everywhere you went was this reminder that death could not be escaped, and that if you went in, I think that's what I meant about, which I think is why it actually works very well as a way of telling this story.
You've been listening to Lore Talk, part of the Lore and Legend storytelling podcast series. Part 2 of this edition of Lore Talk, of Parrots and Porridge Wands, will be available to download tomorrow. Music in this episode was composed and performed by Robert Bentel. On November 14th, you'll be able to hear our next guest episode, where short fiction writer Sarah Pearl shares her unique take on the legend of the last wolf in England. We'll also be releasing our first bonus episode of the podcast, The Legend of Humphrey Head. This episode won't be on our main podcast channel. Instead, it will be available to download for free from the Lore and Legend website through Gumroad. But we will be requesting that you do consider a donation for downloading this extra content. I hope that you've enjoyed part 1 of this edition of Lore Talk. Thank you for listening, Storyfolk.